Silent night starts with the right sheets, and Cozy Earth's bamboo sheets are the ultimate gift. It's everyday luxury elevated, the kind of comfort that turns every night into a serene escape no matter how much clatter arises. Plus, every sheet has a 100-day sleep trial and a 10-year warranty. You really cannot go wrong. Visit CozyEarth.com and use my exclusive 40% off code MIMS25, that's MIMS25, to get 40% off your entire order this holiday season. We get a cut of that money, so you're helping us and you get to stay warm this holiday season. Wrap the ones you love in luxury with Cozy Earth. It's Tuesday, December 16th, 2025. Welcome to Make It Make Sense. I'm Grant Herms. Today in the show, the second most important person in the White House goes on the record a lot. Susie Wiles is the chief of staff for the second Trump administration. She sat down for 11 on-the-record interviews with the country's most prominent journalist, an expert really about people who do her job. And what we learned about how this White House operates was stunning. Not because a lot of it is something that we haven't been able to see from the outside, but because it's someone on the inside admitting we're not blind. Wiles' interviews paint a picture of the president obsessed with revenge and retribution, who doesn't really know what's going on in his administration at the same time, and is also surrounded by people who help make his worst whims realities, instead of being checks on those impulses, despite those people knowing better. Wiles, chief among them. But first, make sure you subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts, leave a comment or a review, and be sure to hit that like button. Subscribe to the Make It Make Sense Substack for just $5 a month, or during our subscription drive right now, get an annual subscription for 20% off the monthly price, and are making the most founding members. You get your price locked in for life. Subscribers not only get access to all the podcasts, but the weekly original reporting, all the archives for those articles, the weekly Make It Make Sense wrap-up newsletter, Too Long Tuned Out, and the things you forgot from Civics class newsletter, a breakdown of the basic civics lessons we either never learned, didn't care about when we learned them, or might be a little embarrassed to say that we forgot. The subscription drive is only running until the end of the year, so head to the links in the show notes to subscribe today. All right, let's get on with the show. Today, two huge stories dropped from Vanity Fair magazine, all about the surprisingly extremely candid conversations with Susie Wiles, Trump's chief of staff. The interviews are broken up into two parts and sort of jump around the timeline of the first year of this second Trump term. Now, before I get into what Wiles said, and she said a lot, you need to understand what her job is and who she was talking to. So first, the chief of staff is one of the most unique and interesting jobs of any administration. They're the ones in charge of deciding what and who gets in front of the president. They're in charge of handling everything that doesn't make it to the Oval Office. They have top security clearance, top secret security clearance, I should say, up to everything that is only for the president's eyes only, and even then, they might be able to see some of that. They're often in charge of managing the politics of any given White House, both internally and the politics of how the president's agenda is playing with voters and members of their party. They're gatekeepers, and the most vital role of any administration after the president, because being the president is the hardest job in the world. And that is only getting harder with each passing presidency because the world is getting more and more complicated, faster and faster. So the chief of staff is a lifeline to making the entire country run smoothly. I call them gatekeepers specifically because the journalist behind these interviews and these sets of articles with Susie Wiles is a guy named Chris Whipple, who literally wrote the book about chiefs of staff and their job called Gatekeepers. And if you're someone who really wants to nerd out on this stuff, reading that book is the best way to do it. It also makes sense as to why Wiles would sit down again for 11 on-the-record interviews and likely many, many more off-the-record ones or ones on background with this guy, because he gets it. And the takeaway from all of these interviews is that Wiles doesn't see her job as chief of staff the way that almost any previous chief of staff has. JD Vance laid it out pretty clearly, saying in the articles she's a facilitator, that the American people have elected Donald Trump, and her job is to actually facilitate his vision and to make his vision come to life. And that's just not normally how the job works. Also breaking from the norm, she really goes in on Trump the man, big names in the White House, in the administration, or people who made huge impacts in the first year of this second Trump term. And when it comes to some of those big names, she doesn't shy away. She calls Russell Vought a right-wing absolute zealot. He's the head of the Office of Management and Budget and a guy who tried to fire thousands of federal employees during the government shutdown, one of the main authors of the ultra-conservative playbook turned policy guide for the Trump administration called Project 2025, and the man who I've played on this show video saying that he wants federal workers to be traumatized by coming into work so they quit. She had a lot to say about Elon Musk, including admitting that she knew that he had been microdosing ketamine while he was working in the White House and still allowed him to call shots on dismantling U.S. agencies like USAID, which was responsible for feeding and vaccinating millions of children around the world. She also admitted to knowing that cutting those programs would mean tens of millions of people would get sick and millions of them would likely die. She called Musk a sort of jacked up Nosferatu, which, whoa, saying that he's an avowed ketamine user and he sleeps in a sleeping bag in the executive office building in the daytime, and he's an odd duck, as I think geniuses are. You know, it's not helpful, but he is his own person. Now, the idea that geniuses have to be eccentric or crazy or callous is a myth that I think is just made up. I think it's an excuse for people with money and power who are also smart to treat people badly. But this is Wiles 100% admitting that she allowed Musk, who she saw as an unhelpful person within the White House with a dependency on a horse tranquilizer, to continue making decisions and influencing the most powerful man in the world. She also went all in on JD Vance, saying his conversion from a guy who called Trump America's Hitler to being his heir apparent was sort of political, and that Vance had been a conspiracy theorist for decades. So in the same sentence, she's calling him both craven and crazy. Here's what Vance said about that today.
Well, first of all, if Susie, I'll trust what you said. I haven't looked at the article. I of course have heard about it, but conspiracy theorist. Sometimes I am a conspiracy theorist, but I only believe in the conspiracy theories that are true.
So that's dumb, right? Vance goes on there a little bit to talk about conspiracies he does believe, like mask use during the pandemic, which isn't a conspiracy, and studies have found that a statewide mask mandates saved more than 87,000 lives, and a national mandate could have saved nearly another 60,000. He says he believed in the conspiracy that Biden was too old to be in office and that the government and the media colluded together to cover it up, which we also know wasn't true because there were a ton of headlines. There was a whole book written about Biden's age during his presidency. He said he also believes that there's a deep state out to get Trump and that the Biden DOJ tried to jail political opponents for, quote-unquote, speaking out instead of, stealing classified documents or trying to undermine democracy and incite a riot to attack the Capitol. What Wiles means is that JD Vance believes in the conspiracies like the 2020 election was stolen or that Haitian immigrants were eating pets in his home state of Ohio. Either way, being labeled as someone who believes in conspiracies isn't a positive opinion of their judgment. Now, I'll circle back to the Biden Department of Justice stuff in a minute because she also went after Attorney General Pam Bondi. Wiles is really mad at Bondi for talking about the Epstein files, saying, I think she completely whiffed, before saying, first, she gave them binders full of nothingness, and then she said that the witness list or the client list was on her desk. There is no client list, and it sure as hell wasn't on her desk. Now, last week I talked about how Bondi is on the short list of people who might not be back for year 2 of the administration, and what Wiles says here doesn't help Bondi's chances for sticking around as the Attorney General. But the most revealing stuff is the stuff she said about Donald Trump. Wiles said that Trump has an alcoholic's personality, meaning that like an addict at the height of their use, Trump, quote, operates with a view that there's nothing he can't do. Nothing. Zero. Nothing. She described Trump as both vindictive and being out of the loop at the same time. When it came to how the DOJ apparently cut some kind of deal with Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein's accomplice, for her to be moved to a cushy minimum security prison, Wiles said the president was ticked. The president was mighty unhappy. I don't know why they moved her. Neither does the president. She said having Todd Blanche, the number 2 guy at the Department of Justice and Trump's former personal attorney, meet with Maxwell was Blanche's idea. Now, none of that meeting was normal, and it's even more weird that Trump wouldn't know what was going on, and it's even more weird than that Wiles wouldn't know. When it came to shutting down USAID, she said the president doesn't know and never will. He doesn't know the details of these smallish agencies. Again, USAID was responsible for the health and well-being of tens of millions of people, including children and infants around the world. It was widely regarded as one of the most successful diplomatic moves for the United States in the entire government. And it's weird the president wouldn't know details about something like that. But I think one of the most telling things about Trump being out of the loop as the president didn't actually come from Wiles, but from Trump's close friend and now chief diplomat, Steve Witkoff. Witkoff was talking about Wiles' connection to Trump's heyday in 1970s New York. She's the daughter of the legendary football commentator Pat Summerall, so she ran in the same circles as Trump. Wiles said, much of what Donald Trump remembers about the New York of the 70s, I lived through with my dad. So when he talks about Frank Sinatra's bodyguard, I know that name. Witkoff said Wiles and Trump are creatures of that same bygone era. Quote, that whole world of the Copacabana and Sammy Davis Jr. and all, those are the things he wants to talk about. And for me, that quote from Witkoff was the most telling and something we've heard about Trump before, that Trump is stuck in a mid to late 1900s mindset about crime, about war, about the military, about the economy and how all those things work. And he'd rather just work to relive those stories about what happened 50 years ago than do the job of being president for today. And it seems like Wiles is all too happy to oblige. Case in point, near the end of the article, she says she has had tough conversations with Trump every day, except not really, saying they're over little things, not big. I hear stories from my predecessors about these seminal moments where you have to go in and tell the president what he wants to do is unconstitutional or will cost lives. I don't have that. And it's not because what Trump is doing isn't unconstitutional or isn't costing lives. It's that he's just uninterested in having those big conversations. What he is interested in is retribution and dishing it out. On bombing alleged drug boats in the Caribbean, Trump sees it as a war of retribution against drugs, I guess, which Wiles admits, and then seems to admit that she knows the president is potentially committing murder, saying he wants to keep on blowing boats up until Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro cries uncle, and people way smarter than me on that say he will. So, as Whipple also points out here, that's at odds with what the administration has been saying about what it's doing in the Caribbean, that it just wants to stop drugs from entering the U.S., not enact regime change in Venezuela. Although this week, Trump did call fentanyl, which he's alleging is coming from Venezuela, was a WMD, a weapon of mass destruction. And members of Congress have said targeting Venezuela is about oil, not drugs. So it kind of feels like we're just doing another Iraq. Now, Wiles also said that she and Trump had a sort of agreement of sorts, that Trump would only be carrying out retribution for the first 3 months of his term, saying we had a loose agreement that the score settling would end before the first 90 days are over, while also saying, I don't think he's on a retribution tour. A governing principle for him is I don't want what happened to me to happen to somebody else. And so people that have done bad things need to get out of the government. In some cases, it may look like retribution, and there may be an element of that from time to time. Who would blame him? Not me. And then Wiles later admitted to the targeting of New York Attorney General Letitia James that it was political, saying, well, that one might be retribution. And then when she was asked if she pushed back on Trump over using the power of the office to go after a political opponent, she said, no, not her, not on her. She had $500 million of his, referencing the judge's ruling in that case. So again, the chief of staff is supposed to be the one who pushes back on these specific kinds of things, for using the government as a tool to punish political enemies for political or personal reasons, and Wiles just isn't doing that here. And for those people who are going to say that Biden went after Trump for political reasons, that just simply isn't true. And we know that from the way that the DOJ was talking internally. Biden's Attorney General, Merrick Garland, actively slow-walked cases against Trump to avoid the implications of political retribution. The Biden DOJ appointed special counsels to investigate the thousands of sensitive and classified documents at Mar-a-Lago, and even struggled over whether or not there was real probable cause to conduct a raid on the president's resort. There were also state cases that had nothing to do with the DOJ, even though MAGA World lumps all those cases together. But in the end here, what we get is a picture of a White House that is in a lot of chaos, where it's unclear who's actually in charge, who's actually making some of the most important calls, and that the entire Republican movement right now is being led by a person in Donald Trump who is largely checked out, seemingly, from the most consequential moments of his presidency. And for her part in this, Susie Wiles is condemning these reports. Again, from things she said from across 11 different interviews, which she also admitted to Vanity Fair the rest of the White House didn't know she was going to be saying. Online, Wiles said significant context was disregarded or left out of the articles, and that they were a, quote, disingenuously framed hit piece on me and the finest president, White House staff, and cabinet in history. Now, right now, there's no evidence that Vanity Fair made anything up. Chris Whipple is a highly respected journalist, and Vanity Fair has pretty strict standards for what they publish when it comes to things like this. Now, cabinet members have rallied around Wiles. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth said online, "This is what the left does, trash and smear our best and most effective people. They do it to President Trump daily." And now to Chief Susie Wiles, except Wiles is the one doing the smearing here. The quotes came from her. And then Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said this on Fox News today.
That this was, unfortunately, another attempt at fake news by a reporter who was acting disingenuously and really did take the chief's words out of context. But I think most importantly, the bias of omission was ever present throughout this story. The reporter omitted all of the positive things that Susie and our team said about the president and the inner workings of the White House.
So I don't know how you could take Wiles' words out of context. They're pretty in context. I don't know how a statement like the president doesn't and never will know the details of the agencies he's supposed to be running, or that he's going to continue bombing people until a foreign leader cries uncle, are out of context. What context should they be in? But also, what Leavitt is describing is how reporting works. We expect members of the White House to say nice things about the president. That's not news. What we don't expect is for the chief of staff to badmouth members of the administration, the vice president, and the president himself, while also giving key insight into how unwell the White House is being run. Those things are news. Now, the other thing that I need to say here is that as I'm recording, the president has not said anything about these interviews or these articles, which is odd. It is all over social media, and it is all over specifically cable news right now. And that will be the other shoe to drop, especially as the president is getting ready for a national address set for Wednesday night. But I will likely have to talk about the fallout from this a different time, because that is it for today's episode. Just some housekeeping stuff here. I am traveling this week for some holiday stuff, so no episode on Thursday, but I have got a great interview for you on Friday this week. It is one you are not going to want to miss. It is all about the Epstein files, which are set to be fully released on Friday. In the meantime, please rate and review the show, whatever podcast app you listen to it on. Like, subscribe, leave a comment below if you're a watcher on YouTube, and hit the bell for notifications. It really helps the show out. Sign up for the Make It Make Sense Substack, where I'm doing the Substack drive until the end of the year right now. And as always, share the show on social media. It's MIMS News Pod. That's MIMS News Pod, all one word, on every platform. I am at Grant Herms on Twitter and Blue Sky, and at Grant_Herms on everything else. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm Grant Herms, and I'll talk to you on Friday.